Hello, we're back again discussing church authority. And now we're going to look at the types of church government. There are three types of church government: Episcopal, Presbyterian, and Congregational. There are some slight hybrids of these, but all churches are governed by one of those three primarily. And today we want to look at the Episcopal structure. Just some general introduction, by way of general introduction. The Episcopal church structure, the Episcopal type of church government, is headed by a bishop or a body of bishops. It is probably it is the most common type of church government throughout history and in the church today. It is observed by Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic and many Protestants. So out of the three main branches of Christianity, two are Episcopal in structure: Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox, and then there are many Protestants who are Episcopal. The Episcopal Church, imagine that, is Episcopal. So is the Methodist Church. So is the Lutheran Church. So is several types of Pentecostal churches. So we have lots and lots and lots of churches who are Episcopal in structure. Bishops are the ones who are the leaders. They are in charge of a city or a region, and then therefore they are responsible for all the people under them, whatever they're called, priests or superintendents or rectors or whatever, and then all of the lay people underneath. So within this Episcopal structure, we have a division between the clergy, the professionals, and the laity, the people. And that structure is really pronounced in Episcopal type churches. You have this solid, sharp definition between clergy and laity. Those who preside over the bishops themselves are archbishops. In Roman Catholicism, the main archbishop is the Pope. He's actually an archbishop. In Eastern Orthodoxy, they're called metropolitans. Same idea. They're the archbishops. They're the bishops, and they're usually located in big cities, and they're called archdioceses that they control because they are the larger cities, the larger areas. Let's look at the history of the Episcopal church government structure. Its origin, as we have said before, can be traced to Ignatius of Antioch, the late 1st century, early 2nd century martyr of the church, who probably instituted the observance of the system in order to ensure that proper doctrine was being handed down. Remember, the Episcopal structure goes hand in hand with apostolic succession, and we've talked about that before. It was in the early church we had all of these different hybrids of religions that were the result of the clash of Hellenism and Christianity, the Jewish world hitting the Greek world and spinning off all this collateral damage. There were all these groups that utilized Christian terminology but were not Christian. Manichees, Gnostics, Marcionites, all sorts of them. And so this idea of the bishop being the one single individual who was entrusted with the true teaching of the church is the origin of this Episcopal structure. By the end of the 3rd century, the bishops were known as the most important church officials. Remember, we said this earlier in one of our videos. Excuse me. That by the end of the 3rd century, the church, even though it was still being persecuted, was becoming more and more institutional in its outlook. The leading bishops of the early church were the bishops of the empire's most important cities: Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch. There were great rivalries here, especially between Alexandria and Antioch. Rome was the political capital, and later Constantinople, but they were cities of graft and corruption. The real learning lay in Alexandria and Antioch, and that's why there developed this church rivalry between these two cities. By the end of the 6th century, the Pope was head and shoulders above all the Western bishops. The Bishop of Rome became known as the Pope, gradually increased in power over time. And the Roman Catholic Church would like for us to think excuse me, that the Pope was always the most prominent church official. But that's just simply not true, and it's easy to see historically. There were important bishops of Rome up until really the end of the 6th century. Leo was one, Hippolytus was another, that were influential and were important. But it wasn't really until Gregory the Great at the end of the 6th century that really became the papacy and the office of the Pope. And of course, the argument for the papacy comes from Matthew 16:18-19, when Jesus said to Peter, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Who or what is this rock? Well, is it Peter? Is it Jesus? Or is it the confession? Because the grammar of the sentence does not lend us to a clear grammatical interpretation. So what is the antecedent to the pronoun this? What does this rock modify? And of course, Roman Catholics believe that this rock is Peter, where I would gather that this rock is the confession, not the man. Is Peter's office being presupposed here in Jesus' words? Remember, it's the idea of apostolic succession. Is this a matter of Scripture? Nope. Is this a matter of tradition? Yep. Because the Scripture is not clear. It's a matter of tradition. It's a matter of interpretation. So the Roman Catholics interpret it one way, Protestants interpret it the other way. Because if we interpret it the way Roman Catholics do, then we all ought to become Catholic again. That's not going to happen. So we really need to realize that that is an issue of tradition. The Pope continued to rise in power until the High Middle Ages. Innocent III was the Pope who was at the zenith of papal power. And then Boniface VIII was the one who presided over the decline of papal power. In his papal bull in the early 1300s, Unam Sanctam, which says that the Pope is the center of the universe. He's getting pretty desperate by this time. There was historical trouble even during this time. The Avignon papacy, where there were two popes at once, and even another time a third pope, all serving simultaneously. The period that's known as the pornocracy, which means exactly what it sounds like it ought to mean. The time when the papal office was bought and sold, and there was tremendous amounts of popes having kids, which they're not supposed to, and then their kids become popes, and just horrible things that the Catholic Church knows about and will admit to, but doesn't want to talk about. After the Reformation, the Episcopal structure was maintained by the Church of England and the Lutherans. Swiss and Anabaptists rejected it. The Swiss, as in the Reformed movement, they went the Presbyterian route. Today, the Episcopal structure remains in the offshoots of the conforming Anglicans, such as Methodists, Episcopalians, and such, as well as Lutherans, as well as lots of different Pentecostal groups are very Episcopal in their structure. They have bishops. Now, what are the strengths of an Episcopal structure? It's very efficient. It's top down. Clear channels of authority. Clear lines of communication. At least in terms of the way it's structured. One man can speak for all and be responsible for all. So in other words, the Pope is the head of the church. When he says something, he's got the whole church behind him because one man can speak for all. So those are the strengths. And we'll let you chew on this some. But those are the obvious strengths of the Episcopal structure. Now, what are the obvious weaknesses? One is that there is no clear biblical foundation for it. You will search very hard to find an Episcopal structure in the New Testament where one man is above the others, at least in authority, because of the office in which he holds. It's very difficult to find an Episcopal structure in Scripture. You find Presbyterian and you find Congregational without too much difficulty, either one of those, but to find Episcopal is difficult. Another weakness is, as a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, such a top-down organization is only as good as its leader. If there's a weak leader, either in terms of his leadership skills or in terms of his morals or in terms of his faith, the organization suffers. The organization is only strong if the one leader is strong. And the idea of seeing the church as a corporate structure is always dangerous. We don't ever want to see the church as a business or as that requires a CEO. We don't ever want to see those things because that really confuses what the church is all about and what its real and eternal purpose is. So that danger is always present, but it's even more present in an Episcopal world where one man can speak for so many. And excuse me, I would caution that is one of the inherent weaknesses of the Episcopal form of government, that it can always degenerate into this more or less corporate world. To evaluate, well, the history is certainly on the side of the Episcopal structure, but how biblical is it? Not very, in my opinion. And second of all, another piece of evaluation, is this top-down structure modeled well in worship anywhere in the Bible? Think even back into the Old Testament. You had some sort of a top-down structure like that with Moses, but it wore him out. And they went to a more decentralized idea of government that persisted throughout the period of the conquest of Canaan and the time of the Judges. Even though there were military leaders, power was in the hands of more than just one person. In the monarchy, Saul was not a good king. David proved to be not a very good king. And then whenever you see the kings down through the Old Testament, that sole monarch never seems to function as well as should, as it intended. The only real monarch that is good and trustworthy is God himself. And that's one of the reasons why I am not Episcopal in structure. In theory, it's great, but it's only as good as the leader. And since we're all flawed, that's going to present a problem when one speaks for all. Next time we'll come back and talk about the Presbyterian structure. Have a good day. Bye.